the demonstration I saw that they're developing is where you could actually be able to walk into a room, put your glasses on, start looking at a device, and be able to actually scroll with your finger to actually pull up wiring diagrams, mechanical flow diagrams, start looking at application guides. As you're standing in front of the device, you can actually hit on that. And then say if you run into a problem, you can actually trigger the headset, make a phone call, get tech support. Tech support now can see what you're seeing. It was very, very impressive. This is Ted Fletcher with FMS Integration, and you're watching the Data Center Go to Market podcast.
Hello, Data Center friends. It's Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Go to Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to have a very special guest joining me here today. I'm welcoming Ted Fletcher from FMS Integration, and owner of the firm that specializes in data center facilities related to monitoring related issues out of Fort Collins, Colorado. Ted, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Joshua. It's a pleasure to be on here with you.
I'm thrilled to welcome you as well. Ted, I think it would be super interesting for our guests to understand is how you've ended up at this place in your career, specializing in working with mission critical data center facilities, and specifically on the facility side. Was it something that you studied when you were in school? Was it something that you got an interest for at some point early on in your career? Where did this spark of interest originally come from?
I think it was slow exposure to technology and things when I got out of high school. I went to school for automotive and diesel, being a technician. Kind of started really enjoying working with electronics, going through on that. Then that ended up evolving. I went to work as a forklift mechanic with electrical electronics, all the speed controls. Started developing more of a passion for the electrical controls and how everything sequences. Ended up getting my first job related around data centers, working with water leak detection cable and those systems, small monitoring appliances. And there just kind of then grew that I moved to another organization that offered a DCSMI software solution, then worked for a large data center co-location provider, and then decided to go off my own to start offering service as far as for telemetry, data integration, everything kind of based around the infrastructure in itself. So it was a kind of just that evolution of getting into a trade, learning something, seeing something new, and just keep evolving as far as where my passion was.
That's a super interesting path to take, because when I talk to so many people that are relatively new to the data center industry, if they understand what a data center is at all before they got into this, it's usually something more on the IT side. So DCSMI software, co-location, telecommunications. Your path was very different. You came in on the facility side, and then somewhere along the line was fortunate enough to work with companies that were in the technology business.
Yes, exactly. So.
And it seemed to have served you well. With that in mind, when you come across someone that's maybe a teen that's in high school or early stages of college, and they're just kind of drifting around, figuring out what they want to do with their career, maybe they've heard a little bit about data centers. They've been in the news a lot lately because of NVIDIA and AI and the massive expansion and power grid capability issues. If you were approached by a friend of a family member or a neighbor or someone asking for advice on what it's like working in the data center industry, what would you tell to someone that's thinking about this kind of role, and specifically something more on like the engineering and the facility side, similar to where you've ended up?
That's a great question. I guess really keep your mind open. Like in the data center industry, it is a very dynamic pace that you have to keep up with as far as with the different demands, changes of technology, and then kind of what part of the data center do you really want to be involved in? Do you want to be on the operations side, the design side, on a service side? I've always taken a great deal of pride on more or less the service side, especially when dealing with older infrastructures. You have equipment that's not talking. How do you make this talk? Like I've always enjoyed taking relatively a dumb piece of equipment and being able to figure out how to make that communicate back. That way it's one less thing the customer has to worry about. If something goes wrong, they're going to get alerts, notification. So really kind of just, I guess, really what drives your passion, what makes you interested in the data center industry in itself. And to your point, most people don't really understand what a data center is. A lot of people hear the term being thrown around, but no one really understands the moving pace of all this power, all this cooling, everything that's going on inside such a dynamic environment.
Do you think with that kind of perspective, there's certain types of hobbies, there's certain types of classes that someone that's thinking that this is 2, 3, 4 years out would want to start with? Are there certain logical part-time jobs that would lead to this kind of path?
Possibly. I mean, I would almost say an opportunity to get in at the operations level with a data center company would probably give you the exposure of really kind of where's your interest. Do you want to be dealing more with the customer interaction, like kind of the sales operations side of things, or application engineering? Or do you want to, more be the boots on the ground dealing with the equipment alarms and the different infrastructure going through?
So with that in mind, I know you've worked for a number of years with a large colocation operator. What advice would you give to someone that's more mid-career? Maybe you bumped into them at a conference and like, hey, Ted, it's been really cool to see your progress where you're doing with your career. Kind of trying to figure out what my next act, what my next chapter should be. Thinking I want to stay within digital infrastructure or data centers. How would you respond to a colleague that was looking to have a cup of coffee or grab a beer with you and kind of ask for advice?
Honestly, my first gut reaction to that would be what was your passion? What kind of drove you into wanting to be in that industry for the first place? Because I think that sometimes we lose our footing we get so caught up in the day-to-day grind of keeping up with issues and all these other factors that sometimes we lose what our passion was, like what drove us to being in that industry. So I think that would honestly be my first thing, because within the data center industries in themselves, I mean, there's so many different positions and things that people can do within different departments, whether you're in graphics, writing code, dealing with the operations side of things. So yeah, I guess kind of have someone just dial themselves back and like, hey, what was the driving force that kind of attracted you to going into this industry? Kind of mentioned earlier, one of my biggest things was I love making equipment talk. I like taking something that's never worked. No one ever had glass on eyes to be able to see what's going on and give them that visual representation of devices that they never had eyes to where that's where you constantly had to have people doing rounds, looking at equipment, logging readings, and just kind of trying to keep up on the infrastructure that way, to where you can kind of have people rest easy when knowing that their stuff's being monitored. And if something goes out of tolerance into alarm, they get notified, then they can have the boots on the ground and be able to react properly.
It sounds like some really sound advice to try to figure out what sparks their passion. But you mentioned something in passing that I'm super curious about. Now, you mentioned getting devices to talk with each other that haven't in the past. When you're doing this out in the field at mission critical facilities, are you typically creating these devices and these interfaces? Are you working with established vendors and like pulling in something like an API, or how does it typically unfold? How is there a need that you see arising, and what are people doing before this?
That is awesome question. And I guess it all really comes down to the age of the technology. What are you dealing with? A lot of newer devices, have built-in APIs and different open protocols to where you can read them into different open monitoring platforms, or maybe you have to go from this older device through another widget in order to get it to talk upstream, or you're retrofitting relays and power meters and all this other stuff to get data off from the devices. So nowadays it has become much more simpler. I'd have to say probably where it changed was after the .com bubble popped. That's where a lot of people had a harsh lesson of using proprietary protocols, and proprietary locking your devices to you was not a very wise move. To where when you work with open protocols and you make your system a vendor agnostic type platform, to where your device can pretty much talk to anything because you work with these open protocols. You give the ability to integrate back to others. And then, like I said, when I got into the industry in 2002, it was just starting to make that transition to where everything was something proprietary. If you want to talk to this company software. You need to buy their widget to tie into this device to get all that stuff to relay up through. Now you could be working with, multiple devices, and you could have one common monitoring platform and be able to read all that device information in. And then also with like the updating of technology, like a lot of people are trying to get to subscribe type services, having devices publish data up, not going too far down the rabbit hole of acronyms, but like MQTT, JSON, a lot of the new protocols that are being adopted by some of these field devices make it that much more easy for data to be integrated up to upper platforms. That way it could be a monitoring system at the data center. It could be a customer custom API that's being developed that you can actually push the data through to.
Is this something that would be considered part of like the building information management systems, or do these run more in parallel, or how does that whole ecosystem work?
Well, I guess it would depend as far as what level of data you're trying to come through. Like in a lot of things I deal with are building infrastructure. So we're looking at the electrical data from the utility generator going all the way down to the server rack, and then looking at the cooling, security, access control. When you start looking at all those things, kind of being the master system integrator to be able to collect all those different data points. And then once you have that repository, how well does your monitoring system then be able to pass data out? So if you wanted to build a customer API for their environment, that you could easily stream that data to a interface that then is comfortable for them. But the biggest catch is then always keeping everything secure. As far as, are you trying to keep everything on-prem? Are you trying to do like your local alerting on-prem and then pushing more data out to a cloud service for a custom API? So that's where I think the biggest catch is nowadays. How do you collect all this data and share this data, but yet still keep all the connections secure to where not going to cause a data breach?
So that's kind of where cybersecurity and facilities monitoring, where the rubber meets the road together.
Yeah, a few years ago and that's where a few years ago, like with a lot of network devices being plugged into the buildings, trying to tie in, I've kind of learned that a lot of network devices get treated as like a laptop or any other device that could be plugged in on the network. So they get put under the same scrutiny.
Is this related to the environmental monitoring category?
Yeah.
In other words, is this similar to the kind of sensors that someone would put in place for monitoring temperature and humidity levels and dampness? And
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, anything infrastructure wise. So, I think that was one of the biggest challenges is how do you collect all this data and then be able to also share data to not only people within your organization, your customers, other applications, but yet keeping everything secured.
When you look at the kind of companies that engage FMS integration, what do you see are some of the biggest mistakes that people are making in this kind of work that you wish could be done a little differently if they were following the kind of best practices that you've discovered along the way in your career?
Well, I know this isn't probable, but because everyone's always trying to move at a very fast pace to get things done, move to the next thing, but just go a little bit slower, just do your checks and balances. When you're getting things brought online, don't cut corners, try to do as much as you can correctly up front and ensure that someone goes back and double checks it, because that's the biggest problem I usually run into is people try going too quick. No one's going back really double checking what's been done. And then it's months after the fact when you kind of realize that things were missed. Or it worked out at day one, but then 6 months later, you start getting intermittent comm issues. Or like I said, I think that one of the biggest things, and everyone tries to move too fast.
Do you think part of it is it's a managing expectations battle, or the process wasn't there, or the culture wasn't there, or they were simply getting squeezed too much on budgetary issues? Where do you see the biggest, where the wheels start to come off the rails? Where does it start to break down?
Probably D, all the above. I think part of it, capital's tight. People want to try to do things, as cost effective as possible, but also do it in a proper time frame. I feel for all the big data center companies that are trying to get their product delivered. That way they can support their customers and new customers with all these high density applications. Every year that goes by, the power demands go up, the cooling demands go up because the servers need more to run these more advanced applications.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Have you seen an increase yet in the demand for the kind of work you do with the remote monitoring as a result of large language models and AI and high performance compute? Has it happened already? The OpenAI is probably a year and a half already at this point. Has it trickled down to a typical client you're working with where they're just putting a lot more stress on the facility management systems?
Yes, I guess for a generic response on that, I cannot to go into any detail. Yeah, because a lot of these AI based and these higher compute models, they do put a lot more demand on these facilities. And when you're dealing with a facility that was built even 5-6 years ago, you have to do a lot of reconfiguring as far as the power distribution, the cooling, to keep up with all these different demands going on.
Are you typically brought in early on in the life cycle in building a new data center? Are you brought in as part of the commissioning kind of planning process? Are you brought in once it's operational? Are you brought in kind of mid-life cycle, late life cycle? Where do you most often enter more this kind of engagement?
Yeah, more mid-life cycle or at the end. Common thing I get pulled in on is usually a project was started, it wasn't finished. So then we go in and reverse engineer and figure out how to get everything communicating and bring it through, going in, helping troubleshoot communication issues that others might have been struggling with. Because it's not uncommon. Lots of times the company that makes the software won't get involved with what's going on with the device and vice versa. The manufacturer that puts the device on the floor really doesn't care too much about the software on the other side. So you always have that break, that median of how do you make the software talk to the component or the device that's out on the floor. So that's where sometimes we're brought in looking at things from a design level, from a communication standpoint, not as much, designing the electrical infrastructure or cooling system architecture, but looking at, the telemetry side of how do you get these devices to talk? What is the most efficient way?
So it's really interesting and potentially a unique challenge about that is you're supporting interfaces that weren't intended to exist in the first place. So with that in mind, who are you typically the superhero for? Who's your internal champion? What kinds of roles, what kind of functions are typically reaching out to you and saying, we got to get Ted, we got to get FMS in here?
Operations. The operation side, because at the end of the day, there's obviously the departments responsible with systems, and then you have different organizations trying to support customers. So we're kind of that niche of these aren't talking, we don't know what's going on here. And depending on what devices, because if anyone that's been in the data center environment, you don't go in and you have all the same manufacturer of devices. Generally, every few years a building's been around, you can see that evolution that they went with manufacturer A, then it changed to B, then to C. So the interfaces change, the options change. So I'd have to say most of the time when we get a pat on the back, it's generally from the operations teams that, we help get visibility back to their eyes of what's going on with their systems.
When you're called in, do they usually have a pretty accurate description of what needs to be done? Or do you spend a significant amount of time on like site surveys and scoping to kind of get your mind around what the real challenge is as opposed to what just manifests itself on the surface?
It's probably honestly a balance between the two. As far as sometimes they'll know what the initial intent was and kind of know, well, we think it was done up to here, but then not knowing the nuts and bolts of what was actually done. It usually takes a lot of dissecting what was previously done, looking over documentation, if there is any documentation, and then kind of reverse engineering what's in place and then what the corrective action is.
So is this usually for larger providers? Would they do this kind of work in-house, or is this almost universally outsourced?
That's a great question. I think a lot of organizations, you want to be able to control your environment. So I think a lot of organizations try to keep as much internal as possible. That way they control their costs. They're more intimate with their equipment, understanding the communications and how everything kind of flows data. So yeah, I don't know. That is really great question, because smaller organizations don't have usually the internal resources of, hey, how do you fix comps on this or program that, and kind of get those different things going. So they typically have to lean to outside sources. But even the big players in the market, they'll get to a certain point that they have to lean on an outside source to take a look. Unfortunately, no individual knows everything. So.
It's one of the interesting things that I spend a lot of time talking through with people, is to helping define what an ideal client looks like, where they've been most successful. And is there a scenario where the location isn't right because the travel would be prohibitive, or is there a company size that's way too big that's much more likely to do this in-house? Is there a company size that's way too small that just wouldn't have the resources to do this the right way? And a lot of times it's trial and error to get to what that perfect client looks like that helps you scale this kind of business.
Very true. Like I said, my biggest, the thing I love the most with doing the work that we do on the telemetry side, pulling in, is just helping fix a problem that was frustrating, whether not getting alarms or not getting the data into a system so they can easily issue reports. Just kind of fixing that and just seeing a smile on someone's face at the end and be like, great, it's working.
Are they able to use this? Are they using this data? Are they using this reporting more for compliance? Are they using it for getting more budget, for more capital on projects? Are they using it for capacity planning? Where does this data usually end up?
I think it kind of probably in all of the above. So it depends on the size of the organization. Are they just using it for internal reports from, like you last mentioned, capacity planning? So as they're starting to build out more, they're making sure that they're putting devices in the right spots, not potentially overloading a section to where they have an underusage in another section. Compliance, being able to have, because a lot of the systems that are out there, when it stores data to its database or however it's storing it, most systems you can't go in and manipulate it. So that's where you can go back and run reports. So that helps with compliance, being able to see exactly, hey, what was our trend lines? What we were doing through this? Another part is overall efficiency, kind of one tying into the capacity planning, but also being proactive, that you're not going to put yourself in a bad spot by overloading something or start reducing redundancy. One of the things that always impressed me with the data centers is, the forward thinking of, hey, if this air conditioner fails, what's our failover? How can we keep carrying on the load and keep the lights on and keep everything running? Same with power distribution, when getting power fed into the rack PDUs. And that's where a lot of the platforms out there, you can get very creative as far as being able to look at, your capacity and not just wait for an alarm to come in to react to an issue, but to actually be able to set thresholds to give you proactive warnings that, you might be getting into a dangerous spot here if this continues.
So a lot of that is really helping them to understand what the baselines and what normal looks like. So they're looking for anomalies.
Yes. That's where a lot of I know the acronyms in the industry are crazy. You have like your BAS, BMS systems looking at all your mechanical data. You have your EPMS, typically looking at the electrical side. And then DSIM, I know a lot of manufacturers have their own little twist on their products as far as their dashboard, their interfaces, all their KPIs being called out through. But to try to marry everything to that single pane of glass to be able to get simplified reporting. That way you don't have to have, when a BMS report comes out, the BMS person understands how to translate it to everyone else. That way you can have something more uniform that a lot of people can understand, whether it's your upper management, as far as looking at how you're doing from being an effective system, being cost effective, keeping everything in margin, to the operations side, making sure that you're keeping up alarms, maintenance schedules, any alerts going on with the devices. So that's where I think a lot of these systems are slowly growing to not be like, well, this is the building control system, this is the security system, to where you have all these disparate systems sitting apart from one another, to where they're trying to get everything to tie in to one platform, just so it makes it easier on all users. Because a lot of the data center buildings don't have a ton of people just sitting around, looking at reports and waiting for things to do. So everyone's usually pretty busy.
So you spend a lot of time with operations teams who, with that in mind, have you given much thought to what this is going to look like, what it's going to look like on their side, and what it's going to look like for your business for FMS integration, maybe 2, 3, 4 years out from now? What do you envision changing? How do you see that impacting what you do on a daily basis?
I don't know. So I see a lot of great things with technology wise. One thing, I was down at a show a couple months ago, and I got to see kind of a blending of using augmented reality and VR, putting QR codes throughout different sections of the building. Not Oculus, I think it was the Microsoft HoloLens they were using to like kind of bridge data. So I see, if people keep embracing technology the way it is, the way things are advancing, it's going to become a lot easier, hopefully, because we have so much great data. It's a matter of just tying it into that common repository. Going back to like the augmented reality with the VR eyeglass set, the demonstration I saw that they're developing is where you could actually be able to walk into a room, put your glasses on, start looking at a device, and be able to actually scroll with your finger to actually pull up wiring diagrams, mechanical flow diagrams, start looking at application guides. As you're standing in front of the device, you can actually hit on that. And then say if you run into a problem, you can actually trigger the headset, make a phone call, get tech support. Tech support now can see what you're seeing. It was very, very impressive. So I think if we keep leaning on the side of technology as far as the advantages of it, I think it's going to make a lot of people's life a lot easier versus trying to like hold your cell phone up between your shoulder and your head, and or even if you're on a Bluetooth and trying to like dig through different guides and figure out how to troubleshoot things through a much more detailed step process, that you'll be more or less boots on the ground, eyes on the device, be able to actually see all these different things, but then also have someone be able to see it through your frame of view of what's going on. So we definitely live in very interesting times when it comes down to technology, and a lot of great companies are trying to figure out can they make operations life easier through it. So good times ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And with all the pressure with utility grid power shortages and having to do more with less and alternative energy sources, for sure, there's got to be a lot more demand for knowing what's going on in the facilities right now to predict what needs to happen a couple weeks or a couple months out from now, so they're not caught totally off guard.
Yeah, and some of like the operations teams, like you got someone new that's on staff going through, they get in front of a panel, they have no idea what they're really looking at in detail because it's maybe the first time they ever opened the door on it. That's where being able to share that data interactive with other people that are maybe the ones that built it or other people knowledgeable, it helps decrease that potential downtime trying to keep everything up and running. So I think it's an excellent stepping stone.
And Ted, do you or the folks that are on your team, do you have any favorite tools or applications that are like must-haves that are incredibly important for doing the work that you do?
Well, I deal with a lot of data integration as far as talking to these different infrastructure devices. A lot of people like to call them IoT type devices nowadays. There are certain Modbus tools I like, as far as like it's called Modbus Pole from Modbus Tools, and phenomenal program as far as being able to help build files, share files with other people, coworkers, or other people you know in the industry, to where you can kind of put aliases to register information. That way, when you tell someone, look at register 40,001, they know exactly what it means. SNMP, I've always appreciated MIB browser from iReasoning. It is a great SNMP tool for going through. I've also played around with Chipkin back in the day when doing like backnet integration. They also have Modbus tools. So kind of from that equipment infrastructure side, I've always liked using those. I use Tridium as one of the monitoring solutions or a data integration going through. And it's a very nice open platform as far as working with open protocols, being able to be creative, making test profiles. So if you're vetting things out, those are probably some of the best tools for someone on my side of the fence that I like leaning on. That just makes life a lot simpler when trying to troubleshoot and help doing data integration.
Is most of that toolkit something that's also pretty widely used, widely accepted by your operations counterparts at the client side?
I'd have to say yes, especially like on the Modbus side. Modbus poll, like I said, on that one, it makes it very friendly because you can actually put a name to what a register means. That way it makes more sense when you pull something up. That way you're not going back to a spreadsheet or a PDF trying to figure out going back and forth. A lot of other people I know have used ModScan as being an open tool. There's so many out there over the years. I've just gotten very comfortable or lazy with Modbus poll for the sheer fact that you can actually put an alias name like next to a register. iReasoning, when I got into the industry around 2002, people were using that type of tool back then. So when you talk to a lot of people dealing with SNMP style protocol, and you mentioned MIB browser, I'd have to say 85% of the people that are dealing with those infrastructure devices understand what that is. And then backnet, you're all over the place with the different building control tools and what people are comfortable using. So Chipkin, I think, is one of the better ones out on the market, but there's all sorts of stuff out there. I think the last one I was turned on to was called Yabe, which is actually a very nice, very friendly program. But seeing I have Tridium, I can pretty much hook on and do the exact thing that a lot of those other tools can do. So
that's terrific. Well, Ted, this has been super interesting, super fascinating to learn more about this side of the business. I spend most of my time talking with people on the operator side and on the technology side, sometimes a little bit on the construction and capital side, but not so much deep in the facility side. So it's been really interesting to learn more about this particular line of business. If someone's curious and wants to learn a little bit more about you, wants to learn a little bit more about FMS integration, what's the best way for them to follow or reach out to you? Are you active on LinkedIn?
I am active on LinkedIn. I have a profile up on there. Someone, if they wanted to browse our site, like I said, we deal with everything more on the infrastructure, the telemetry side monitoring. So they could go to fmssi.com and be able to get to our contact page going through on there or look at any data. And then we post our phone number up on there. We have a contact us form. We publish our info at fmssi.com email. So we try to make it very easy if someone wants to reach out to hit us up. We've also made a YouTube channel years back, and I always like to keep it open to people. I'm always looking for suggestions because I might see something that might feel like, you know what, really need a video on this to help describe this, or maybe this manufacturer wasn't clear in the documentation. Let's make a 5-minute video to help show how you do this certain procedure. So honestly, the best way to reach out on LinkedIn or hit up the company website.
That's great. Yeah, I'll make sure to include the captions and the video and include the links with the show notes as well for someone to reach out. And just like you, I'm a huge fan of YouTube. I was in early, probably 2008, right around the time that YouTube was acquired by Google. And the videos back then looked pretty primitive by today's standard, but it's a great way of educating and building trust with scale. And you get fans literally all over the map, all over the globe. Yep. watching, reading your stuff, some where English is a second or third language, some captioning, but yeah, it's an amazing way to attract and build a brand online, both for yourself and for your company.
I couldn't agree with you more. 2008 is actually when I started playing around with YouTube, making like kind of short instructional videos. I've had to do training classes over the years, and I know there's nothing worse than when an instructor is talking about kind of a dull topic. Start losing your audience after 15 minutes. Start putting people to sleep after 45 minutes going through. So short little videos, specific to a point. And as technology grows around the world, there's nothing easier than a video. Being able to watch someone go through a screen. What do you click on? How do you do this? Have subtitles that can be crossed into other languages. And it's definitely evolved leaps and bounds, because one of the things that drove me to making my first video was working with an organization out of China, to where I think we were up to like 3 weeks of emails going back with the time change, trying to figure out what's going on. Well, did you do this? Well, what about that? Well, you have to set this. Finally, I made it. I think it was about a 3-minute video with my time wasn't even a smartphone. It was like camera, MP4, record it, upload it, send it over. Those 3 weeks could have been all avoided with all the emails going back and forth if we had just created that 3-minute video to start with.
Pictures 1,000 words, a video's 1,000 pictures. It's crazy what can be accomplished on demand, live video, long form video, medium form video, short form video. There's a big reason why it's taking over as the predominant form that people are consuming content. And I saw something a week or two ago that YouTube was even starting to displace Netflix in terms of the average amount of time that people are spending watching on smart TVs. Crazy.
I could see it. Was it based on the shorts, just like people just flipping through, quick scrolling, or actually watching longer videos on YouTube versus Netflix?
I think it was minutes or hours of pure consumption. So it was probably geared more towards longer form content. But yeah, it's super interesting to find that as much as the streaming services displace traditional cable TV stations, they also have to contend with the fact that YouTube has no moat. Basically, anyone that wants to can set up a channel and decide to have a focus and start sharing their passion. And the category we're in, it's a phenomenal place to put out best practices videos and how-tos and interviews and tutorials. And if you pick, to the extent that you're creating evergreen content, these are assets. We have videos that we did 10 years ago that I don't know why they still get views, but they still do. And some of them click on the links in the descriptions and go to the website and become leads and subscribers. And it's an amazing way to get the word out. And it's probably one of the more interesting ways too, for people that are concerned that traditional search optimization is going to be displaced by the Gemini and the pilot and everything. Like, YouTube is really, really interesting hedge against that also, because it's the second most popular search engine in the US, one of the most popular search engines around the world. So it's another way to capture interest. But yeah, it's super interesting to hear about that. We could probably do a whole separate podcast episode on building out tutorials to support a remote monitoring facilities consultancy kind of business.
I'm going to say, if you ever want to circle back, I can always share my lessons learned with, okay, how do you do your videos? How do you cut them down? How do you strip them? And trying to keep it more subject specific. I always try to look at the shorts, people doom scrolling, going through their phones, just like, well, could I actually make something in 30 seconds that would actually be helpful to people out in the field? Be like, no, I probably need at least 2 minutes. So
what's really interesting about that though, is the shorts, all the engines, and it's not just TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, YouTube too, LinkedIn as well. They don't need you to mention that you like anything or comment on it anymore for them to know that you really enjoy that content. They know you stopped and you watched it, and they know if you watched 100% of it or 200% of it or 30% of it. And because of that, if they want to keep you on the platform as long as possible, you will see more content from that creator, from that channel, and you'll see more content on that topic in the coming hours and days and weeks. And their effort to try to get you to spend all day there.
It's brilliant and scary all at the same time.
Absolutely. Well, again, Ted, really appreciate it. I've been speaking with Ted Fletcher from FMS Integration in Colorado, and I wish you all the best in growing your business and continuing to do great innovative things to help your data center clients get a better handle on what's going on in their facilities.
All right. Thank you very much, Joshua. I appreciate your time.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.